So now I will turn things over to Liz Reppy for a couple of brief remarks.
Thanks, Sarah. Hi, this is Liz Reppy. I'm the state law librarian. I just wanted to give you an idea of some of the ways that the state law library can assist you find folks as you are doing pro bono out in the legal community. A few things that you might not be aware of. We have a large collection of legal resources. We support the research needs of the appellate courts. So we have resources on most any sort of topic that might come before a state court. And we're talking about print and online resources here. We offer free CLEs, like we are co-hosting the one that you are at right now. At our law library, we have access to free Westlaw. If you don't have access to Westlaw or don't want to use your firm's Westlaw for pro bono. And the other big thing is our law librarians have been doing this for quite some time and are always willing and happy to assist attorneys in tracking down resources, in research strategy, that kind of thing. A lot of the services that we provide nowadays, obviously because of COVID, are remote. And so, we're helping people every day who are not having to actually come here to our law library in St. Paul. And we like to kind of tell people about the 20-minute rule. If you've been kind of spinning your wheels with research for about 20 minutes, it might be time to reach out and get some assistance from us. So that's just a quick summary. I'll let you start your CLE, but please feel free to reach out if you are looking for some resources or some research help. Thank you.
Thanks, Liz. And I will go ahead and turn it over now to Roy Ginsburg, who will be our moderator today.
Thank you, Sarah. Welcome, everybody. My name is Roy Ginsburg. I've been an attorney, coach, and consultant for the last 15 years, although I've been a practicing lawyer actually here in Minnesota for over 35. And I help lawyers in the areas of business development, practice management, exit strategies, you name it. Why my interest in this particular program today? I actually have somewhat of a respectable background in the pro bono area. Over the years, I've been in and out doing some volunteer work. More recently, I made it a personal goal myself to figure out ways to promote the idea of pro bono and spread the word to the membership. Hence, that's my reason for moderating today's panel. And I try to practice what I preach. I myself do some pro bono. I'm going to provide a shout out to 3 of the organizations that I have done work for in the past or continue to do work for: Children's Law Center, Immigrant Law Center of Minnesota, as well as VLN, Volunteer Lawyers Network. All of them have had great experiences with, and there are many others in town, which we will perhaps talk about a little later on in the program. As you can see, the title of the program is, I'm going to be level with you, I'll be honest: Uniform Pro Bono Reporting and Financial Support of Civil Legal Services. It sounds pretty boring to me. Bottom line is, when we have to do our registration this year, there's going to be a few questions they're going to ask that some of you may not be happy about having to answer, but nevertheless, we still have to answer them. So we're here to educate you about what those questions are and why they are there. And we'll finish up talking a little bit more about the need for more pro bono lawyers here. We got a great panel from all segments of the bar here in Minnesota. So I'll just go, each of you introduce yourself, and we'll just go in the order that is here on the screen that we're all sharing. So Dee, why don't you go first?
Sure. Good afternoon. My name is Dee Baskin. I use she, her, or they, them pronouns. I am the Executive Director of Loan Repayment Assistance Program of Minnesota. We pay student loans for legal aid attorneys until they reach public service loan forgiveness. So that way they can do their awesome work and not worry about the money so much. Thank you.
Dee, do you provide any assistance to lawyers outside of legal aid? Or it's basically your mission is just to help legal aid lawyers with their debt?
I would love to help everyone, but due to limited budgets, we all have that, and nonprofits, we are focused on legal aid attorneys because of the income gaps with paying their student loans, as we'll talk about later. the legal aid attorneys are making the least money of all of the public interest attorneys that we have in Minnesota.
Dee, can you give us an idea of how many lawyers you actually help on an annual basis? I know
Yeah, we support about 50 attorneys each year, and they're helping about 10,000 clients each year.
Okay, great, thank you very much. Katie, you got this nice fancy title, Access to Justice Director. What does that really mean?
Hi, Roy. Thank you so much. So as he said, I'm Katie Dreyhaus. I am the Access to Justice Director at the MSBA. So my role is to bring together all different parts of our legal community, legal services, the courts, the private bar, to improve access to justice for all Minnesotans, but particularly for low-income Minnesotans. And in that job, I get to work with a variety of lovely people, many of whom are here today, towards that goal.
All right, Ann, you're up next.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ann Hefkin. I am the Executive Director of Legal Services of Northwest Minnesota. We are a nonprofit who provides civil legal aid services, one of the regional programs across the state of Minnesota. Some of you, I also am representing, I think, all of greater Minnesota. The rest of you are all metro based. I believe, I don't want to speak for all of you. I am sitting in my office here in Moorhead, Minnesota. Legal Services of Northwest Minnesota, as the title probably hints at. We serve 22 counties in Northwest Minnesota. Many of you are probably also familiar with the services of Mid-Minnesota Legal Aid, or SMERLs, as people call it, SMERLs, and other regional legal aid programs. We also partner with many other smaller legal aid organizations to fill the gap. And I think I'm going to talk about that more in a little bit, but that's who I am. Thanks.
Okay, Ann, are you primarily funded by the feds? That's the legal aid organization thing in DC, or no, not so much.
No, actually the state of Minnesota does a fabulous job providing funding. So we receive money from the state of Minnesota through a legislative appropriation that comes through the Supreme Court as a line item. It's really in the weeds here a little bit. We do get money. We are a legal services corporation funded organization at LSNM. And so we get about 15 to 17% of our funding is federal funding that has not really kept pace with inflation, which is why Minnesota, thankfully for Minnesotans all across the state, has stepped in and provided some of that funding. And like many nonprofits, we take funding from all kinds of places, right? We take donations and we do foundation funding and we do grant writing and we do United Way partnerships and on and on and on. So it's a presentation for another day, but yeah.
Right. Okay, thank you, Ann.
Thanks.
Natasha, you're going to be the real expert on the rule because I see you're from the Office of Lawyer Registration, and I believe they're the ones who have to enforce the rule and responsible for implementing it. Is that right?
That is right. Yes. Thank you for having me. My name is Natasha Melchioni, and I am the managing attorney for all of the Supreme Court boards, which includes the Board of Law Examiners, continuing legal education, lawyer registration, and legal certification. I've been in this role for about 4.5 years. Okay.
So the next thing I want to talk about is one of the things as I've been a pro bono attorney, interested in this whole area. I've always been confused by, the alphabet soup of a lot of organizations and what's pro bono, what's legal aid. And some people think, well, what about the public defender? Don't they provide, to services to the poor? So I think what I'd like to do is eliminate at least some of the confusion that some of you may have, and just sort of put the types of legal services that are provided by the poor and what the proper label is. Because I know, like I say, I've gotten confused. I suspect some of you be confused. So my outline here is right, Ann. I think you said that you're going to try to eliminate some of the confusion that some of us may have.
I'll see what I can do. I may create more confusion, and if so, throw those questions in the chat, right? So like I said, I work for a civil legal aid organization. We provide free legal services to low-income individuals and seniors in non-criminal cases. So I know I'm talking to, I presume, mostly lawyers, but I have this conversation a lot. People say, well, aren't you entitled to a lawyer if you can't afford one? In criminal cases, that is true. because of US versus Gideon, in criminal cases, that's what the public defender does. They only do criminal cases. And then there's a small handful of civil cases where in Minnesota, there is a right to counsel. So in a child protection case, a parent facing loss of custody of their child, for example, there is a right to counsel in a very slim, and people call that civil Gideon. But in the vast majority of cases, people are not entitled to a lawyer. And a lot of those cases that we do are really impacting basic critical human needs. So food, income, shelter, and safety. And due to lack of resources, we really focus on those. And if it doesn't impact one of those key areas, we're probably not going to provide representation to people. We try to ensure that low-income people have those critical basic needs through sorry, someone's at my door, through representation and advice and self-help clinics and all variety of ways that we do those non-criminal cases. And I often tell the story about my predecessor, who was the director before I was. She was a police officer briefly, and she was involved in a case where someone tried to kill their spouse. And the spouse was entitled to an attorney because they were facing a criminal case, which makes a lot of sense, right? It is the state trying to incarcerate someone that levels the playing field and provides a sense of fairness. And she recognized all of a sudden that the person who had faced the violence was not entitled to or able to have an attorney to represent themselves to divorce that person. And that's the gap that civil legal aid tries to fill. And literally, those are the types of cases we're taking. We are taking cases where there is domestic violence, where children are at risk, where they are facing adverse childhood experiences, trying to preserve safety in housing as well, safe, secure, affordable housing, and income maintenance, and all of those basic critical needs. So that's what legal aid does. We try and fill the gap. We have two basic ways that we do it. One is through our staff. So we're a law firm, we're a nonprofit law firm where I have lawyers on staff that do some of those cases. But we also provide services through our private attorney involvement panel. People call it PAI, and that's what we're going to be talking about today is pro bono. Pro bono can be free legal services, or we also use a Judicare panel, but really I think based on today's focus, it will be lawyers who volunteer their time, their skills, and the privilege that it is to practice law and to represent someone in a case because we have these law licenses to provide free services to help people who can't afford them in these critical areas of legal need that are non-criminal. So
And
I
would you
talk
say
fast.
that,
So does that help?
that's yeah, very helpful. So is it accurate to say that family law, landlord, tenant, and bankruptcy are the most popular areas where the need is the most?
I think family law, we get the most calls on. I think in large part because people sort of understand family law requires court orders, judges, they think lawyers, it kind of tracks. Housing, I think, is second. Same thing, you get an eviction notice, there's court action involved. Housing law. Third, I would say I would be broader than bankruptcy. I would say consumer issues. Because ultimately low-income clients were not providing a lot of bankruptcy, but consumer issues. And then the other area I would say would be, I would call bankruptcy almost like an income maintenance. They're garnishing my wages. Do I need to file bankruptcy, or can I file bankruptcy? How do I stop this garnishment? Or I'm getting sued. And also I got denied healthcare. I got denied access to healthcare. Again, one of those critical basic needs, and any kind of public benefit, healthcare, income maintenance, unemployment, those stabilization type cases.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
All right, so you definitely clarified the issue of what's a legal aid lawyer versus the pro bono. And as you mentioned earlier, this is really about pro bono because I'm hoping and assuming most of the attendees are members of the private bar. And that's who we're trying to promote. And you're the ones who are going to have to fill out your registrations to talk about some of the reporting issues that this program is all about. Lawyers being lawyers, we tend to make things more complicated than they need to be. And pro bono is no exception to that. Because then the question is, all right, what the hell is pro bono? And again, if you look at the rule, there's a rule out there known as 6.1. That's basically an aspirational goal that says lawyers should do 50 hours of pro bono work. It has a few more details in there some of those we'll talk about here. But I want to make it clear, at least initially, what, generally speaking, without getting too much into the weeds, because then it goes off the rails very easily. So I don't know, Katie, you want to take the first crack, and everybody could chime in on, how do you define pro bono, especially to a certain extent about the reporting issues that we're going to be talking about very shortly.
Yeah, so I think for this purpose, I mean, the Rule 6.1 also in Minnesota also refers people to pro bono provided to persons of low income means through approved legal services providers, which will send you the link to that list and talk about who they are later later in the program. But it is, providing service under with those organizations for no cost.
Yeah, that is probably the simplest way of looking at it. If you're doing work and you're working with a low income and it's direct representation, chances are that will qualify. It's all the other stuff that gets a little complicated if it constitutes pro bono or not. One thing I would like to point out is that I know in all my years working with lawyers, some lawyers seem to think that when they're stiffed by a client and they don't get paid, that constitutes pro bono. No, that does not constitute pro bono. That's just being a nice guy to someone, or someone just you getting stiffed and you didn't manage them well enough. That is not pro bono just because you didn't get paid. It's also not, in the vast majority of cases, it's not pro bono if you feel sorry for the client when they walk in and you agree to cut the rate. That's just, they're not necessarily poor. They may be having a tough month, a tough year, whatever, and you're still presumably making money on it. So a lot of lawyers out there think, well, that's what I call low bono. Low bono is not pro bono. Again, generally speaking, pro bono is providing legal services to people who can't afford lawyers, who desperately need it. And again, we'll get into more the nitty-gritty of what constitutes the pro bono or not, as far as reporting is concerned. Does anybody on the panel want to add anything to what I've just said about what both Katie and I have talked about of what constitutes pro bono? Anybody in general? Okay, moving on. Okay, all right, Katie, you're on. Now we're on to the slide. We're going to be sharing a slide. All right, in a nutshell, what Katie's going to do is explain the rule, and before we get into the nitty-gritty.
Okay, so I'm not going to read this word for word, so you are all capable of reading through the rule, but basically this rule was passed earlier this year by the Supreme Court order. And it affects your lawyer registration. So next year, when you get your lawyer registration statement from Natasha's office, it will include 3 questions that weren't on there previously. The first is the approximate number of pro bono hours you did in the previous calendar year. The second is the number of hours of 6.1b, the other activities to improve the legal system and the practice of law. And then the third thing will be a checkbox, which you check off if you have donated to a legal services organization. So it's super simple. If you do participate in a program such as the MSBA's North Star Lawyer Program, you may already have gathered all your pro bono hours and sent them in to us to be recognized. So you would have those already. And that program will be starting up here soon in December if you're interested. And it's approximate. And so it's just these quick 3 questions that you'll need to answer when you get that registration form.
Okay, I'm going to even dumb it down more. 3 questions. The first one wants to know, do you do any pro bono? The simplest way to know that is pro bono is if you provide direct legal services to someone who's poor and can't afford a lawyer. The second one is, do you do things that, so that would include the work that I am presently doing for VLN as well as the Immigrant Law Center. Second question is, do you do things to improve the bar? And correct me if I'm wrong, Katie. So in other words, me doing this CLE, it constitutes hours for the second box. And then finally, do you give money, to the cause, so to speak. But again, lawyers being lawyers, and they now have to spend about 30 minutes explaining what I've just said in about 30 seconds. One thing I would like to point out is there is the chat box here. I'm not going to actually moderate it. Take a look at it. The people at the State Law Library are going to be monitoring that content, and the good questions will be, questions that you may have will be forwarded on, and I'll be interrupted with those questions, for our panelists. Feel free to, submit those to the chat box. I also want to tell you that even after the program is over, by all means, if you want to send me an email, I will make sure it gets answered. I'm not probably going to know the answer myself, but I'll make sure I forward it on. My email address, I believe, is on the materials. If not, it's roy@royginsberg.com. Pretty simple. Okay, now that we've established, Katie, why do we even need this rule? What's the basis? Why are they making life difficult and asking us to check 3 boxes?
Well, there's a couple reasons why we advocated for this rule, and the first is that it gives us data and numbers to know where we're at. While we do have this encouragement to do 50 hours of pro bono, we have no idea how many people are actually doing that, or how much our efforts to improve that number are work. And so by gathering this information, we can have a baseline and we can measure it going forward. How many people are doing pro bono, and how many hours people are doing, how many people are supporting legal services financially as well. I think another reason is that it is really important to us, to the courts, that people are doing pro bono. It's important to our community, and it really does make a difference. So this is a way of showing that this is important to the community. They want this information. And I think, kind of on the bottom of the list, it is a tool to make us personally accountable to, it's a place that we have to write down how many hours. And I think it encourages people to do pro bono. To be clear, the court is not going to be holding you accountable. It's not required to do pro bono. It's just required to report how many pro bono hours that you're doing. So kind of all those things together make it a really useful tool, especially for those of us that are looking at statewide trends and statewide needs and where those legal needs are and how they're being met. It is really helpful. And
Katie, it's my understanding that I know data helps a lot of the organizations themselves for funding is needed. The more accurate the data is, so I'm presuming this data will be helpful to the entire state, all the organizations within the state to get money from whoever they try to get money. Am I right about that?
Yeah, most definitely. It's a really common question that programs are asked to answer on grant reports, on reports to their government funders, is how are you engaging the legal community? How many pro bono hours are donated to your organization? And hopefully with some of the data, the Supreme Court can see kind of where in the state pro bono is flourishing and where it might have some unmet legal needs through pro bono.
All right, thank you, Katie. All right, so now, Katie, now that you explained why the need for the rule, let's go take a step back and figure out why is there such a high demand for pro bono, lawyers to do pro bono. So with that, I think we're going to share some slides. Is that right, Katie? You need to unmute, Katie. Katie, could you unmute? There we go. Okay, looking at the slides, Katie, you need to unmute.
Yeah, this is Anne's portion, so I'm going to let Anne take over.
Oh, I'm sorry. Was that? Maybe I got that
I'm
wrong.
unmuted. I'm unmuted. I'll talk.
Okay.
I was not intimately involved in the development of this rule. I was peripherally involved. So, but what I do know is that, and as this chart shows, that 2014, it's a little confusing because the number is 2019, but if they look at the bottom, you can see what the year is. And 2014 was really a high watermark for pro bono services in the state of Minnesota. Now, these numbers are cases that are tracked by the Legal Services Advisory Committee. So this what is
that?
Yes,
and
I was just going to say
acronym.
Yes,
most
so
people don't know.
People will say LSAC, Legal Services Advisory Committee, and part of the alphabet soup. They are a committee that is responsible for divvying out a portion of the money that comes through the state legislature. So this, as I mentioned earlier, we get money through the state legislature, and it also IOLTA funds, and it goes through the LSAC committee. And if a program gets money from LSAC to do legal aid work, we are required to, after applying and receiving funding, to turn around and submit data. And so this data comes from programs that are funded by LSEC. So we know that this doesn't capture every single hour of pro bono work in the state of Minnesota. Before I joined legal aid, I was in a big law firm in the Twin Cities, and when I also lived in the metro, like the rest of you, and I did pro bono work through that big law firm, it would not have been tracked in this data. But that being said, what this data shows us, at least for programs that do pro bono or people that provide pro bono services through legal aid programs, from 2014 on, there has been a slow and steady decline in the number of cases closed by pro bono attorneys. And so part of the reason for this rule is to try and figure out what's going on and trying to figure out how to encourage pro bono work because of the huge unmet need of the low income community. You know, I mentioned earlier how we really focus on critical basic needs. I talk to people every single week that would absolutely be benefited with the help of a lawyer because the judicial system is not really set up for people to represent themselves. Although Minnesota's done a good job with forms and making it as accessible as possible, there's a lot of magic language that if you think back to your first semester in law school, I always talk about it as being dropped in a foreign country without a dictionary. And that's how those clients feel. A lot of those clients are also in crisis and maybe have language barriers, disabilities, other things that make it difficult. Very long-winded way of saying having a lawyer by their side doing a pro bono case is huge. So as this chart shows, there's been a slow and steady decrease in the amount of cases being closed by pro bono attorneys. And thank you, Katie. Also, the number of active pro bono attorneys has been a slow and steady decline, and that we've looked at and tried to analyze why that's happening, and we're not really sure. There's lots of reasons, right? And we know that there's pressures of practice, and there's hourly rates, and lawyers are retiring, and all of those reasons I think are mixed together into a magical soup. But we know that there's a need out there, and I talk to clients every week that I wish I could say to them, I can have a lawyer sit down with you and help you. So this is part of the need and for the rule, and part of the need for the data. Really, the rule provides us with data on what's going on. And as Katie mentioned, it's a little bit of a check, like, oh, you know, I did 27 hours this year. I really wish I would have done my 50. Okay, I'll do better next year, right? It's our end of year evaluation. True. I don't know if the Supreme Court intended that, but I know for me, when I do my end of year self-evaluation, things like that come up. So
I want to re-emphasize, excuse me, Ann, I
yeah,
want to re-emphasize that the 50 hours, again, once again, is aspirational.
Aspirational is the magic word.
No one is putting, yeah, lawyers get bent out of shape, but somehow they think that we have to do pro bono. No, we don't have to do. Actually, it's our job to convince you that it's probably a pretty good idea to do it. And there are lots of reasons, again, part of the reason for this particular program.
Yes.
So the hours are going down. Let's just get rid of the slides. So why don't you, Katie, move the next slide again. This is all the topic of, you know, why do we need, why pro bono was so important, and then along that, why do we have this new reporting rule? So there's one more slide, right, Katie? With the salaries. So why don't we talk about that, or someone talk about that? Anna, yeah, I guess
I can talk about it briefly. I'll just keep going.
Right, and
by the way, I just got pulled into this thing not that long ago, and I'm talking a lot, and I will continue to talk until I get interrupted. Those who know me,
we're not going to ask you
that.
what you make, Ann. Don't worry, okay?
Yeah. Well, I often tell the story of I came from, like I said, I came from a big firm. It'll be 18 years on February 1st that I moved to legal aid, and haven't quite caught up yet. I think I'm real close, though. I will say in 18 years, I caught up to my associate salary at big firms. So okay. That being said, there is a compensation crisis in the civil legal aid community. We're not competing with private practice. That's not what we're competing with. We're not intending for civil legal aid lawyers to make the same as private practice attorneys, and that's okay. What we're trying to tie salaries to, or the where we're looking, and as you can see here, is public interest lawyers and really public defenders, right? They're the most a close equivalent of the work that we do. This slide is from our presentation last year at the legislature, and we have been able to do some salary improvement since the slide was made, which is really exciting because of an increase of funding from the legislature. So that is really amazing. But what you can see from the slide is we are the lowest paid attorneys in and that's why Dee's program is so important and really helps the attorneys that I work with that still have student loans be able to do this work, this really important work that they love to do. So
And
yes,
could you
go
talk
ahead.
could you talk about the difficulty of attracting people with these salary levels? I'm assuming it's not easy.
It's really hard, right? Let's be honest. It's again, there's been some improvement, but we still fall behind the public defenders. I think on the statewide average, we're up to a average starting salary of about $56,000. So there's been some movement. The PDs are between 75 and 78. So there's still a gap there. And I think, you know, we've all heard a lot about the Great Resignation. And so, yes, attracting people is really hard, especially with people's student loans. I mean, we all know if you get out of law school now, student loans are really problematic. In rural areas, I'm just going to plug my greater Minnesota problem here for a minute. It's even more difficult. There are lots of what people are calling terming legal deserts in rural Minnesota, in that there are no lawyers. There aren't civil legal aid lawyers, there aren't private practice lawyers, and the access to justice for anyone is really hindered by that. So hiring in my rural offices, if anyone wants to work in Bemidji, I do have an opening, or frankly, two. I always say if I get 2 or 3, I would take them all. So it's a lovely community. It's a beautiful big lake. If you like to ice fish, it's really a great place to live. They're of a nice combination of lumberjacks and hippies. So Bemidji.
And what's the Reader's Digest version on why it's so difficult to attract lawyers to Greater Minnesota? Because I know that, like you said, there are deserts out there. I know the problem is not unique to legal services. It's a problem to the private bar as well.
And it has problems in other industries as well, right? I mean, healthcare and all kinds of industries. I think, you know, I moved from Minneapolis. It's different. The rural areas are different. You need to want to live in a small town. And then if you have a significant other, maybe doesn't want to move there as well. We've had a number of lawyers who had a significant other who said, yeah, let's go back to the Twin Cities. So I think it's a lifestyle choice. In addition, you know, so there's all kinds of reasons, I think, and there's lots of research out there on why that is. And it's not just salary. I mean, salary is part of it for sure, but it is also wanting to live and work in a small community and not knowing what that really means. I think there's the concern of, you know, putting up a shingle and being on your own. I'll tell you what, if anyone wants to be really busy, there's lots of small towns that could use a lawyer, right?
I know that firsthand from some of the clients I work with in outstate here in Minnesota, as well as other rural communities across the country. I'm aware that it's really a crisis situation in like the places like Nebraska, the Dakotas. I mean, I've read that I think places in Nebraska, the closest lawyer is 3-4 hours away.
Yeah. And I don't know if remote courts and the ability to do what we're doing here will change that at all. Will allow at least people who have access to technology and funds, probably not quite as true for low income clients, although we have put some technology in place to try and make this happen, to access the resources of the metropolitan areas, or even access the resource of an attorney that's 2 hours away, much less 5 hours away. So I think that remains to be seen.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think actually the pandemic will increase the speed of that occurring, because clients are just going to have to go to the bigger cities that's an hour or 2 away. They're not going to have a choice. And I think with Zoom, hopefully they'll feel a little more comfortable. But the bottom line, they're still going to need lawyers, even though they're not going to be in downtown, you know, on Main Street downtown. And that's going to be the next best alternative. Okay, why don't we talk about other areas of the need? We've talked about the need in, rural parts of our state. Let's talk about other areas. Katie, you have anything to add, or Dee, Natasha?
Well, I can jump in. The statistics that we report for our LSAC reporting is that only 40% of people in Minnesota are getting access to legal services when they need them, due to limited resources, like Anne talked about, as well as just, for our organization as well. I mean, there's a great need. There have been needs that have increased due to the pandemic. We had one of our recipients come to our board meeting this morning and talk about domestic violence situations when things first shut down. There was kind of a lull, and then about 3 to 6 months in, people who were stuck at home living with their abusers were needing services like orders for protection. And so those sorts of needs rapidly increased. So there absolutely is a need all over. And, when Anne had talked about people representing themselves, we also have to keep in mind that not only is it a scary process for the client, it also slows down legal processes for everyone who has to go to court, because there are people who just have no idea what they're doing, and they're filing things or not filing things that they're supposed to in a timely fashion. And it really slows down the process for everyone else who's trying to work through the court system. So we definitely want to do our best to help with all of the needs in all of the areas of legal aid that we can.
Okay, Katie, why don't you just throw in any statistics or anecdotes, just, I guess, talking about the overall need as well as maybe the continued need during the pandemic.
Yeah, and I will echo what Dee and Ann said. Prior to joining the MSBA, I spent almost a decade working in legal services at Tubman, and I had to be the person who turned people away quite frequently to say, yes, I agree with you. You need an attorney. Unfortunately, we don't have enough attorneys to give you one. And that's a really hard thing to say to someone, and to hear those responses and to give them other resources, but know that most other organizations, all the other organizations are in the same boat. They just don't have enough funding to hire enough help to serve everyone, and there aren't enough pro bono attorneys to serve everyone. And so thus the need for increased funding, how important it is for the legal community to continue to support legal services, whether that's through giving on an individual basis to Ann's organization or Dee's organization, or giving to someplace like the Minnesota State Bar Foundation that is funding organizations all across the state. It's important. And those two, pro bono and supporting organizations financially, really go hand in hand, and both are necessary. Even if everybody met their aspirational goal, if you do the math about how many low-income people there are in Minnesota and what percentage of them need legal services each year, and divide that out by all the hours of the attorneys giving pro bono, it still wouldn't be enough to meet the need. And so there is that need for both people who are getting paid to specialize in these fields and take cases, and then also people who are trained by them to take pro bono cases as well.
Katie, I'm going to give you a chance to plug Tubman. You mentioned Tubman. I don't think some of the attendees are not necessarily familiar with that organization. I know they do great work. Why don't you tell people what they do?
I'm happy to do that. So Tubman is a nonprofit organization. They have two domestic violence shelters. One domestic violence shelter in Maplewood, and they also have a legal department, which is helping victim survivors of domestic abuse, sexual assault, and stalking get orders for protection, and to provide legal services for them in their family court matters. Just in a nutshell, and that program has been around for many years, and really has a strong, vibrant pro bono program and 3 staff attorneys that are working. And again, the need and the applications for services far outpace the resources available to help everyone who has those needs.
Okay.
Roy, this is a good time to jump in with the question we have in the chat here.
Thanks, Sarah.
Sure. So the question is, so does pro bono only count for this rule if done through the legal aid groups?
I guess Natasha, you're probably, well, actually, why don't we put that aside, because actually there's a perfect segue into the nitty gritty, and Natasha is going to be the star of the show. And just so people know, there's plenty of resources at the MSBA website, basically addressing pretty much all the answers that you're going to hear from Natasha now about the nitty gritty details. It's under, let's see, access to justice, then click pro bono, then pro bono reporting. There's basically a Q&A there that is pretty informative, but if those of you who prefer to listen and learn that way as opposed to reading, Natasha, you're on. So who does the rule apply to? This is Rule 25. Somewhere it's like a Supreme Court rule that these are not in the rules of professional conduct. These are other rules that we're subject to. that Natasha's office is in charge of. So Natasha, why don't you tell us who the rule applies to?
Sure. Just to clarify, the rules, Roy, are actually under the rules of the Supreme Court on lawyer registration. And so Rule 25 is the main rule that we're looking at here. And who does Rule 25 apply to? It applies to all active status lawyers in Minnesota. And that excludes, though, judges and governmental agency attorneys. So, I mean, certainly they are free to answer those 3 questions that will appear on that lawyer registration statement beginning next year, but they're not required to. But all other active status lawyers are. And I want to just clarify one thing that was mentioned earlier. Yes, attorneys are going to be required to answer the number of pro bono hours that they are performing, but just to make clear that an approximate number is absolutely okay. And it's also okay to answer 0. There's not judgment attached. This information, your personal information, your personal answers are not going to be shared. Rule 23 is adding subsection H, which talks about how that information, your information on your lawyer registration statement is not accessible to the public. So this is just information that will be considered in the aggregate and to be used to determine where the needs lie and how we can improve pro bono work here in Minnesota. So it's confidential and it's meant to be very straightforward, very simple to answer. So basically, like Roy said, just kind of cutting it down to what will be required on your lawyer registration statement: approximate number of hours, whether you provided pro bono support to other activities, other, improving the law, kind of like what Roy has said, he is doing here today. And then the question of whether you have contributed financially to any of these organizations that provide these services to individuals of low or limited means. So it should not be very time consuming. You should not stress too much about getting the exact amount of hours, but be as accurate, obviously, as you can, because that information is incredibly important for all of us to have in the aggregate.
Natasha, I want to interrupt you just for a few minutes, a second. What about lawyers being lawyers? They're going to be a few who don't want to say it's none of your business and refuse to answer. What happens then?
Well, it is a requirement. And so if attorneys are not going to provide answers on those questions, it could result in administrative suspension. For this first year in 2022, that administrative suspension will not take place. We want people to be able, the court wants people to be able to become used to this rule and to, have a chance to answer the question appropriately. So those administrative penalties will not take place in 2022 pursuant to the court order. But, going forward, that is something that attorneys will need to provide.
Okay, what about the time?
When does this actually go into effect? Starting when's the next registration? When are the people registering next? Sure. Well, the rule changes January 1st. And so the first group of attorneys to actually report will be the April 2022.
Why don't you educate me and actually is it like I'm an April 1 registrant, but
sure.
There are other dates of registration. How does that work? There were like three or four dates during the year?
Right, exactly. So each quarter, basically, there's a registration period. So, April, July, October, January 1st. So there was a question in the chat earlier about, if I am due January 1st, I didn't report. Well, that's okay because the rule doesn't actually change until January 1st. So don't worry about this until you report in April and after April. Another question that we had is, what is the look back period? It's the preceding calendar year when you're looking at how many hours.
Okay, so it's easy for, I'm April 1. I just talked about 20 my pro bono hours last year.
Yes.
Okay, what about if I'm a June or October, whatever, the next ones, the same, just, it's not it's the actual full calendar year of 2021. You don't have to break it down by the previous 3 months or whatever.
No, just the calendar year. That's the look back period.
Okay. Yep. So we have when it goes to effect. We have the time frame. All right. Let's move to the financial contribution piece. So this is about not only hours, but we want to encourage lawyers to give more. Correct? So who, without getting into the weeds too much, who qualifies for aid? If I give money to Tubman, I assume that qualifies as a contribution.
That may be a better question maybe for
Well, what,
Katie.
yeah, who wants,
I am
I'm sorry,
happy
who wants to talk,
to-
who wants to talk about that?
Yeah, so because the language of the rule is that organizations that provide legal services to persons of limited means. So that really focuses again on those organizations that are serving low-income Minnesotans. So you could check yes if you donated to an organization that does both of those things. So provides legal services, either staff or pro bono attorneys to direct legal representation, and where the clients are screened for low income. So there is a list, a full list of those organizations on our website, on our frequently asked questions, which a link will be provided in all the materials that we send out. We have them divided up by region. So if you're looking and you'd like, to donate to somebody that's in your area, you can definitely do that. But it's basically organizations that are funded by the Legal Services Advisory Committee, LSAC. Thank you, Dee. Yep. And those that are designated by LSAC as being eligible for CLE for pro bono work as well.
Okay, Katie, what about, I get to the United Way, and I know the United Way gives to, Tubman and whatever. What does that count?
In our evaluation, it does not, because they're also funding great organizations, right? But they're also funding, your money could be going to organizations that don't meet that need. So it really needs to go to either places that are only funding legal services. So again, if you donate to the Minnesota State Bar Foundation, there is a checkbox that you can check off so that that money only goes to legal services organizations. But as generally like United Way or things like that, then that wouldn't count.
Okay.
It also,
I'm sorry,
I was
go
also
on.
going to say it doesn't, donations from your law firm also do not apply here. It's individual donations.
Okay. Do you have any idea of the background of why, I guess, don't we want to encourage law firms to volunteer, or what's that all about? To the extent you even know.
Certainly we want law firms to continue to fund legal services. Many of them do an amazing job, and we couldn't do our partnerships without law firm organizations as well. But because this is an individual lawyer registration form, we're looking for the individual donations. What about as part of Rule 6.1?
What about foundations? I'm on the board for the Hennepin County Foundation. My understanding is every dollar we raise goes to an organization that provides legal services. I think actually, now that I think about it, not all provide direct representation. Most do. So are those, does that, those be given to the state bar or the county bar?
Yeah, I haven't looked at those organizations directly, so I couldn't really speak to whether that would qualify, but certainly you could bring that up with your board members and, see if there are steps that you could take to qualify for that, if they fund a more broader spectrum of services.
Okay.
Roy, we had another question in the chat.
Sure.
If we could go back a little bit. I think this would probably be for Natasha. How does the new rule define government agency for the purpose of the exemption?
That I am not sure, but I can look that up and I will let the group know.
Okay. Does anybody on the panel see any gaps in what we talked about regarding the nitty gritty? And again, I think not only do you read the rule, I'm saying this to all the attendees, but I think the MSBA does a really good job on their site of a Q&A. What do you need to do? So we still have some few minutes. So I want to spend a little bit of time talking about some opportunities to volunteer. So Katie, you're going to be on at least to start. Then I'm going to give you, actually, since you volunteered your time, you're going to get to Dee and Ann, pitch your organizations as well about what are the pro bono opportunities available within your particular organizations. So Katie, why don't you just give a broad brush or just talk about where's the need today?
Yeah, I mean, there are needs across the state, across practice areas, and across populations. So when I am talking to people who are interested in pro bono, there's there's a couple things that I think, or a few things that I think are important to kind of think about before. One of the biggest things I see is whether you want to do litigation or more administrative work. That's a really big difference in opportunities available there. And once you have that figured out, you can go to projusticemn.org. I don't know, somebody can put that in the chat for me, which is kind of a clearinghouse of all the pro bono opportunities available. The MSBA has a pro bono spotlight section on our website as well that we've started that is going through kind of highlighting different kinds of opportunities, pro bono attorneys, their experiences, highlighting those, and then also places that our legal community, individuals in our legal community choose to donate. And I think there's some really good examples of organizations there. You can always contact me if you aren't finding something that fits. And then we'll also be sending out with the materials a link to, again, a list of different non-legal aid organizations in your area that could be helpful when you're looking for some place to volunteer.
Thank you, Katie. Dee, does your organization actually have, I'm just thinking about what you do, your mission. Do you have pro bono opportunities with you or no?
I do not. I am a staff of one, and I usually refer people to places like Ann's organization. I mean, BLN or Tubman. We have recipients with all of those organizations. So I usually refer people to our legal aid partners who are looking for pro bono.
Okay, Ann, I'm going to ask you not only to get on your soapbox for your particular organization, but actually for all the outstate organization opportunities, because there's always obviously a bias. Obviously, the things that that I've mentioned, some of the organizations Katie's mentioned, they're all kind of based here. Most of them don't have really much opportunities outstate. Why don't you talk about specifically your group, and then as well as what you know about other outstate organizations?
Sure. Well, here's what I would say. I mean, I'm not going to turn anyone away from who wants to volunteer at any program. I think on a broader level, I think the one thing I want to mention is that people can do as much or as little and get in as, there are lots of advice clinics, I guess. So you want to just give advice. You want to step in and talk to someone for 15 or 30 minutes and give them advice. It's incredibly powerful for people to be heard and to get a little bit of information to move forward on what their legal rights are in a family law matter, in a landlord-tenant matter, in a consumer matter, any civil legal issue they're facing. People, not always grateful, but people really are incredibly thankful and feel better when they've been heard. And a lot of low-income people don't know any lawyers, right? They don't know any lawyers. So suddenly to have a lawyer talk to them about their legal issue is really powerful. So those virtual clinics or in-person clinics or whatever is happening are really worth someone's time and incredibly satisfying. I occasionally do them still, and I find them very satisfying. So, and if someone wants to get more involved and do full litigation, represent in a family law case, which is extremely hard. I always say I'm a recovering family law lawyer, but also really rewarding. Legal aid programs I know will provide training and support and everything that you need to be there. I always tell the story of the first pro bono case I ever took at a big firm. We had reached an agreement and we were sitting in front of the judge. I've never talked to a judge. I did real estate. And the judge said, okay, you've got an agreement here. Who's going to draft the MTA? And I had no idea what an MTA was. No idea. And it turns out you can fake it pretty well, right? You look down, you let the other person agree to do it. You run back to your mentor and you ask her, what's an MTA? So that being said, I think legal aid organizations do a really good job supporting people if you're in an area of law outside of your typical practice. I also want to throw out there that, we talk a lot about family law, and absolutely huge need. Advice clinics, orders for protection, always orders for protection, harassment, restraining orders, a real set amount of time. The thing about a full rep case is it could take months or years, and how many hours, those are really hard, right? So managing your time, choosing what volunteer opportunities you want to do to manage your time in family law or other areas. But it's also areas of law, if you're more comfortable practicing in real estate or probate areas, those issues come up. We'll have clients who have taken care of their elderly parents for 10 years. Their parents pass away. This is a real story. Client continued to pay the real estate taxes, and all of a sudden they stopped accepting payment from her because she didn't own the home. She had to probate her parents' estate. She had no idea what she was doing. Incredibly simple probate. I mean, not for me, but for somebody who does probate, an incredible simple probate issue for this client to own a home, right? This basis of stability, the home, her family home. So I'm talking a lot and quickly because that's what I do, right?
Yeah.
But you know what I mean? You can do it in all areas of law, right? If there are some people who are like, I don't want to do anything with family law, totally fine. Organizations will find work for you. I promise you that. You know, here, here Legal Services. Yeah, go ahead, Joy. Go ahead.
No, I'm going to just share a few, personal anecdotes about this. But before I even go there, I want to talk about the three common barriers, and I'm going to rebut them all. The first one is malpractice. If you do work through basically any organization here in the state, some of which we've talked about, there are plenty of others, 99% of the time you're covered by their malpractice, so you don't have to worry. That's not an issue. Second big objection that I often hear, especially for solo and small firm lawyers, look, I don't have the backup, I don't have the systems. Yeah, it's easy for Dorsey and Fagery to do it, but not so much for me. I have found in my own experience that if you need that kind of backup, the organizations that you're working with will help you affiliate with someone who can provide that. So that's a BS excuse, especially for the solo and small firm lawyers out there who somehow think they're exempt, compared to the big firms. People should know that the large law firms here in this state have, incredible reputation among the other states of the pro bono that we do. So as much as there continues to be a need, the Minnesota Nice has a very, very positive connotation throughout all the state bars in the country. But a lot of that reputation has been attained by the bigger firms who really devote a lot of time and money into the cases. I know that a lot of smaller lawyers in smaller shops somehow think they're exempt, but not so, and you can still hook up with either the organization or other law firms that are staffed to do this stuff. And then finally, probably the biggest objection is I just don't have the time. I'm busy with this, I'm busy with that. You got to make the time, bottom line. Obviously, I work with lawyers all the time. Time management is a big issue. It's important. I think lawyers way underestimate the good deal that we have, as far as we have a monopoly. Part of this licensing thing, this registration, is basically it's a privilege that is granted to us because we have passed the bar, and we can practice in the area. We're not, going to be put out of business by startups and things like that. People need to be lawyers. We really have a monopoly on lots and lots of things. Yes, I am well aware that LegalZoom is encroaching, little by little in certain practice areas and things like that. But bottom line, we got it pretty good because, again, we don't really have to compete much for what we do. We only have to compete against other lawyers. We don't have to worry about some technology putting us out of existence, like so many other industries, professions, et cetera, do. So I kind of, one of the reasons I do pro bono for a lot of reasons, but one of it is like, that's what I got to do. The state's being nice enough to give me a license to make a nice living. So I got to give, and poor need legal services. There are lots of other reasons, of course, to do it. But I think it's, very, very important to do because of that privilege that, we are provided. I'm looking at the clock and I see 12:59. So I promised everyone on the panel, as well as the attendees, that we're going to end no later than 1 o'clock. I'm going to keep to that promise. I want to thank all of the panelists. Great information. Appreciate your time and effort going into this. And I appreciate everyone tuning in. Again, if you have any more questions, feel free to email me or look online. Most of the answers are there. And I hope that, we've converted at least a few of you to put it on your, list of things to do, your New Year's resolution, to do some either more pro bono if you have the time, or to start, doing it. And any bit helps. It doesn't necessarily have to be 50. 50 is great, but even if it's only 10 or 20, that's better than nothing. Again, I want to thank everybody for attending. Sarah, thanks for coordinating all this. And I wish everyone a happy holiday season and a happy new year.